Hello and welcome to Full Disclosure, a podcast project designed to let me spend more time with interesting people than I would ever get on the radio programme. It strikes me, Dan Snow, historian, broadcaster, author, that given the changing nature of content production during the course of your career, people have probably spent a heck of a lot more time with you than would have happened in previous generations.
They like you. Some people complain they get too much of me. What can I say? I feel I've had a very. You never think you're going to be that strange crossover generation. When the plates of when those seismic plates change, you think, well, all the change has occurred. Now the future has arrived, and I'm part of that future. But actually, I look back now, and I'm like one of those Victorians who was marvelling at the invention of the railroad. So I began a BBC project. Went to Egypt with BBC Two, and they had loads of time for research. Big, huge team, £15,000 excess baggage on the plane on the way out there. We took all sorts of equipment. We probably didn't need cranes and jibs and weights for them, assistant camera operators. And we spent weeks in Egypt filming in extraordinary detail. And now I go out with one other team member, sometimes just myself. You've got mics that plug into phones. You've got phones that have... We tried to calculate the other day. Even our phones have something like 64 times the resolution that those first cameras I worked with at the BBC had.
Seriously?
Yeah. Wow. And so you're going out. They've got stabilisation. It's built into them. Some of these things now. So you can now fly out to Egypt to make that same show. In fact, I would argue a better show with hand luggage only. And of course, you kind of work it out on the fly. You've got the internet. You can pull up a map of a World War II battlefield when you're there. So yes, content's change, and we're all, as we all know, blasting out acres and eons of content.
Hours and hours and hours. You and I don't want to jump the gun unduly, but it strikes me you've always been a student of the business as well as a student of history. You've always had a particular interest in how. I remember seeing you on Have I Got News for You years ago, and you were very interested in how the business worked and your side of the business, how who was getting history programs and what they were capable of.
I think that's true because I've never been as talented as you and had one person just say, come and work for us for 20 years. So I think I was aware that being a presenter, being a broadcaster is such an insecure thing to do. And it's the most in your 20s, it's the most glamorous and fabulous thing to do. And you can't believe your luck. They send a taxi round to your flat and your housemates all think, look at that. And then you get in the back and you go and ride a horse for a day dressed in armour and someone breaks lances against you, or you fly a Spitfire and you can't believe it. And then suddenly you look around and think, hang on a minute. I've got no job security. I am one commissioner's decision away. I'm one terrible review. I'm one terrible set of overnight viewing figures away from never doing this ever again. And you start to think. So I'm a very uncommercial person. I think I'm very stupid at these things. But I did realise if I was to have any hope of longevity or doing what I loved for any amount of time, I'm gonna have to start seizing the means of production. I'm gonna have to start going, hang on, hey, that's interesting. Someone's invented a website that allows subscribers. Okay, well, I think I better get one of those. And I never felt comfortable enough just at the BBC going, oh, they're just going to employ me for years to come.
How interesting, because you were quite young to have those thoughts, and you had them before you'd run out of road. I found an interview you gave in your 20s when you said that the nice thing about starting early is that I hope I'll be able to build this momentum behind the career and then build a marriage and family later on, because I come from a wonderful family and I really aspire to give my kids all the advantages that I had and all the love I had as a boy. And you were in your late 20s when you gave that interview, and you're already thinking of the job as a means to a fulfilling life, which is quite precocious.
I guess so. That's an interesting quote.
You've done all right, haven't you? By that measure.
By that measure, which is the most important measure I have, and that has been one of the many privileges I've enjoyed. That has been one of them, was the ability to, so many of my colleagues and friends in factual content, archaeologists, scientists, they go and they establish themselves professionally in their 20s. Then someone knocks on the door when they're sort of 35 and say, oh, that was interesting. You did a little bit for the news, or do you want to come and have a chat about making a TV show? Yeah. Just as they're embarking on family life and all the huge responsibilities that involves, and then they have to sort of work and join that crazy magic roundabout and say yes to last minute things and come on. If James O'Brien asks you to come on the show, you come on the show, and that has it can have a very detrimental effect on your personal life. So I was lucky. I went completely bonkers in my 20s. Worked weekends, worked over, didn't bother me because I was in your 20s. And it did mean that when I had kids, I could afford to say no to things, and that's it's always wrenching, as you know. And it's funny. I've just remembered you try and think about the ones that got away, do you, James? But I got invited to go on this Canadian expedition, went and found Franklin shipwrecks in the Arctic. And I was invited to go as part of the BBC programme doing that, but it was my son's due date. And so I stayed behind, obviously, and I didn't go on that expedition. And that's fine. I'm totally fine about that.
But it's still there.
It's still there.
And it's a once in history kind of moment, kind of thing.
That is the problem.
How much of this is because of your dad having belonged to a different generation? For people who don't know, your dad is not Jon Snow, the former Channel 4 newsreader. Your dad is Peter Snow, who kind of worked in a field more similar to your cousin than to you, but he was a historian as well as the sort of famous political statistician and the king of the swingometer and all that.
That's right. So he's a journalist,
yes.
And he became a sort of historian, like many dads do.
Yes.
The journey in late middle age towards thinking, actually, I'd like to write history books.
But so was he always on the end of a phone? Was he always being sent away on assignments?
Yes. So he was old school busy,
yeah.
And he would when Hillsborough happened, I still remember we were at home, and Dad simply stood up and walked out of the house. Without any phones and bleepers going off, he just went,
knew.
I'm going to get to the office right now.
Yeah.
And the important point about that story is, without one idea of what might happen to the kids, in his absence, and so, and that's why my mum, who also worked, which makes it even more impressive, was left sort of being responsible for all of that. In a way that my dad is now, very always talks about and is very aware of. But no, at the time he was driven. He was the diplomatic correspondent initially, and my older half brother and half sister would say that, he was just away all the time. He was properly Jeremy Boweing it around the place in the Middle East, spent a lot of time in war zones. And I think when he had me, it was in his 40s. I was very lucky. I got more of him. We tended to see him at weekends and things, but no, he would disappear. He would disappear off to Kuwait and for the first Gulf War and things. And I'm not a journalist, and I think that must be brutal. But I'm someone who, when you work in factual, which on the outside all looks the same, but it's actually quite different. Our shoots can be quite planned, and
yes.
we go, right, that's 4 days. I'll try and avoid half term, and if I fly back Sunday night, I can take the kids to school on Monday morning. There's more sort of control and to most of my projects. Some of the
it's usually sportsmen, and it's a similar generation actually. You're 46, I think now.
Just about to turn 46.
Just about to turn 46. Sorry,
yeah.
Biographical detail. It's part of the job. You should know that. It's usually sports people that we talk about coming back from a tour to attend the birth of their child, and it's that same rough generation that we did things that my dad was a journalist on the end of a phone as well, that it would never have occurred to them to do. But there's no resentment here. There's no bitterness. That was just the way things were.
I think you're right. There's no resentment. The kids. The main reason I think there's no resentment, and the lesson I've tried to learn, is that when he was home, he was on. So it was short, sharp shocks, and if anything, you can tell it's my sisters. By the end of some holiday, we were quite pleased to see him head back.
There's a war suit.
Party conference season. Yes. Excellent, well done, lads. Gets him out of the house because he's making us go to every battlefield, stately home, and historic abbey within 150 miles of our house every single minute. So, and I think it's the funny thing about quality time, but I've really tried to remember that. On a week, if I've been away all week, on the weekend you've got to turn. It's quite funny because I was filming in Pompeii last week, and it's I don't expect any sympathy, but it's like a difficult place to operate Pompeii because you can't get vehicles in there, and you were walking around with a kit all day, and it's a big site, and you're filming everything, and it's really hot. And anyway, but nice problem to have. But you and everyone on the team is like, oh God, this weekend I'm going to go back and might go down the market and have a cup of tea. I really like this, and I'm like, I'm going to get up at 6 o'clock on Saturday morning. and I'm going to say to Mark, there's never going to be one word. It's going to be like, right, great, yes, breakfast. Then we'll get Brockenhurst Badgers for my son and daughter football. I'll go and pick up the other daughter from hockey after that. You've got to be, it's on. But that's right. That's right.
Yes.
You can't go, I'm sorry, I'm going to sit around and watch the Grand Prix. I've been really busy all week. I mean, that's just not how it works.
I just done a radio show about what they have called, the Social Market Foundation have called it assumed knowledge. It's something that we both care about a lot. It's why our paths have crossed before today, because of a charity that we're both involved with. That realization that people come to sometimes, that what they thought everybody had, lots of people don't have. So assumed knowledge in the context of culture, or in the context of knowing how to get into industries, or knowing how to apply for university, or to apply for academic courses. And something that emerged in the radio show is that it's not one divide between two constituencies. There's 1,000 different levels in this hierarchy. How much of your childhood, like literally at home with your dad and with your mum, who was also a broadcaster, Ann MacMillan, do you look back on now and realise, good Lord, that was extraordinary? Other families wouldn't have had experiences or conversations like that. And yet for you, of course, as with all childhoods, it was the only one you ever knew. Yeah, well,
you're totally right. And the funny thing about me is that my privilege is very obvious, because I have a second. I'm Jon Snow, Channel 4 News dad on Newsnight election programs. So but actually what I say to people, that's the tip of the iceberg. Actually, funny enough, not super important. Jon Snow and dad didn't strong arm anyone at the BBC had given me a job when I was in my late 20s. But they're also right to point at me as the product of enormous privilege. But it's the more hidden stuff. It's the unseen stuff. It's the reason I was rowing at Oxford in the first place. It's the reason I was able to converse about history in an engaging manner, because that's what we did as a family from the day we had it with our mother's milk. So, yes, I think a lot. We were taught. Look, we visited historical sites. We engaged with historical topics at the dinner table. As I mentioned, from Kuwait and Iraq earlier. Now, I remember Dad, when Kuwait was invaded in August. It was summer holiday, so I was with him. And there was this sort of bellow that went up the radio, sort of crackled on, and then Dad's like, right. And then it's like, all of kids, I want the atlases, I want the encyclopedia. So we all ran around the house and pulled out big atlas, because there's no internet, right? And he's like, well, it's fascinating. You look at the border, it does look a bit artificial. Because Saddam was saying Kuwait was an artificial post-colonial state, ought to be really part of Iraq. And so you're looking at the geography, and then you read up and think, oh, okay. And that we were involved, we'd be involved in conversations like that all the time. And when we...
And you were genuinely energised by it.
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Because that's not guaranteed, is it? You might have found it deathly dull. You might have wanted to do it, I don't know, tinker with cars or something like that.
Well, and my dad he urged me not to go into this industry, because and now I feel the same way about mine. I'd be interested to know what you think about your kids. But my dad took me for a walk around Barnes Pond when this call came in saying, Dan is rowing at Oxford, and he's been in these sort of videos, these sort of, the Oxford and Cambridge boat race can be a bit dull, so they sort of spruce up with videos of students going, oh, I'm so tired, I've got to do my studies and train. And so I was one of said whining students. And someone at the BBC Development said, what about him doing a show, history, because I was talking about history in this thing. And, hang on, his dad's on, why don't we get them doing a show together? I'm great. And my dad originally said no, and then he also took me around. We walked around Barnes Pond in South West London. He said, you're better than this. Which I wished was true, but he hoped, as we all did, that because in his career he'd met like architects and engineers, and people building canals, and he sort of thought that's brilliant. And of course those guys probably thought they want their kids to be journalists. It's then this never-ending dance. And I'd die now if my kids wanted to become broadcasters. I'm like, please go and become bioengineers or something exciting.
Is the distinction between achievements and talking about other people's achievements, or is that too simple?
I wonder if he did feel like that. I wonder if he felt after a long career he would like to have done more things rather than just constantly reporting and chasing around, listening to gossip about them, and grabbing Margaret Thatcher as she came out of a meeting. I wonder if Dad thought, God, maybe I should have tried to be in that meeting myself. What's so sad and strange about us weird humans is then you meet the politicians who spend all their time trying to jump on, become your colleagues here, on the radio.
Sort of pleading for my holiday cover.
Yeah, exactly. And Elon Musk wishes he's a politician, and politicians wish they're Elon Musk. We're all in this sort of mad merry-go-round of insecurity.
Yes, insecurity, which you've already alluded to in the context of wanting to have a clearer idea of what the future would hold. And I don't know if precocious was the right word to use. It just mature sure. Actually, it's quite an odd interest to have. But let's back right back then to Barnes, where you went to primary school. A very happy home, as you've just described it. A very erudite and energised home, where enthusiasm for the things that you found interesting was shared with your parents and your sisters. Did you stand out? Did you stick your hand up all the time?
No, I don't think so. I think I was quite good. I did love history from the beginning. I did a project at primary school on Captain Cook, and it changed my life. And it's one of those wonderful, those when you go to primary school, you do those lovely, you do sort of maths and geography and history. You don't know you're doing them because you're doing them all within a kind of topic. And we had this one of Captain Cook, and there's still a picture of me dressing up as Captain Cook. And I fell in love with really 18th century history without knowing it, and maritime history, and in some senses kind of exploring and seeing the world. And I remember I just couldn't think of anything cooler than being on a boat sailing to the other side of the world with astronomers and marine biologists and naturalists all on board, navigators working together, learning and exploring. And that's so funny is that's my origin story. Now I've interviewed Aboriginal Australians who are my age, who say when they were in school, Cook was the ultimate baddie. You'd say Cookie's got him. Cookie, and because for them he represented everything about the coming of the Europeans and the tragedy that befell the original. And I thought, isn't that an extraordinary thing? There's me still with my little. I think I've probably still got that little picture somewhere of me dressed as Cook. And another side of the world, he's the ultimate villain. So no, I wasn't, and I was particularly bad at maths. And I remember I always feel like this, and this is again something the privilege. I mean, there were kids in that primary school class. Across from there was a big council estate, and most of the kids came from the council estate, and there were kids in that class who were much smarter than me, especially at maths, just natural mathematicians, and I think one boy called Solomon was quite disruptive, and I look back and he was incredible. He was obviously very bored. Sure. Whereas sort of plodding middle class kids like me were sort of happy to sort of sit there and go, all right, 2 + 2, miss, all right, equals 4, and I look back and I think of the talent. The talent that we're just letting slip through by not harnessing people like Solomon. I think about him all the time.
And then St. Paul's.
Then I went to private school.
Was there pressure? It was quite hard to get in to St. Paul's, or was it?
I snuck in. I was the headmaster wrote to my mum and dad and said I had to go for a series of interviews, and in the end, I snuck in.
How much pressure did you put on yourself? I sense that mum and dad probably weren't. They would have been fairly relaxed.
No, they were relaxed. They were relaxed. They just thought it was at the end. There were 2 schools I was going to do. One was St. Paul's, which was an independent school in our area, and the other one was Sheen Comprehensive. Also, so those were the 2. It wasn't like, right, come on. The sort of
and there was no prospect of you being sent away to school.
No.
Did your dad go?
Dad had a reasonably unpleasant experience.
It's another sort of generational shift.
Yes,
huge. Because I mean, how many greats is it to take us back to Lloyd George?
Well, he's on
the other side.
My mum is Canadian, but strangely, her great grandfather was the Welsh Prime Minister David Lloyd George, and he. Although it's quite interesting, there was never a kind of hagiography. In fact, we were descended from his kids by his sort of first marriage, which was obviously very unhappy, and he disappeared off with his mistress, who was formerly the governor of one of his daughters, and tutor of one of his daughters. So we did not. My grandma grew up not liking my 9, as we Welsh 9. It was not like David Lloyd George, this, that, and the other. Right. Like he was a scoundrel to her, and he betrayed her beloved 9, her grandmother, who she adored and she used to live with. So there was very little sort of right, here we are, and there was no sort of heirlooms knocking around. Like I think those had all gone elsewhere.
Well, there was a presumption that your generation would follow your father's generation into boarding school, and so
yes.
I just quite like this idea of your dad and your mum being people who didn't feel hostage to expectation, which is tallies with the approach you took later to the business.
I think he. My dad and mum, the sort of big change from the 60s for the sort of almost Victorian parents. Yes. My dad had to be the icebreaker for that in a way that some people are still going through that today.
Yes.
My dad was the one whose dad never hugged him. There was no physical.
Exactly
they shook hands, and my dad remembered shaking hands. And then my dad also remembers at age 18, my grandpa, who I never met, sort of flicked down the newspaper and said, "Do you know the facts of life?"
Gosh.
And my dad said, "Yeah." And his dad went, "Good." And that was it. And my dad still talks about that conversation, as a sort of, but we were jumping into bed, mum and dad, but I think that was my mum's Canadian influence more, and also changing times, and that. So I feel very, I think dad was probably the one who I had to make that adjustment, and might have been a bit strange. But
quite pioneering of him then.
Yeah, I think so.
To know that he wanted an emotionally literate, demonstrative life that he hadn't had in his own childhood.
That is exactly the way to put it. Yeah.
And so St Paul's, where I presume you started rowing there. Did you excel academically?
Not particularly. No, not particularly. I was just good at. I'm one of the many huge strokes of luck I've had in my life. One of them is the English education system allowing you to basically give up everything at age 16 and just do what you want to do.
So you could, well, it's a mixed blessing, isn't it? But it means you didn't have to do the things you weren't good at.
Exactly. So it's clearly a mixed blessing for our sort of national productivity and linguistic skills and everything else. But in my personal case, I'm very lucky in that I was just happened to be good at one thing, which was sort of writing essays, I guess.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing when you think, so I did. At 16, when I'd been an average GCSE student, I suddenly shone because I was doing English, history, and politics, which is an absurd thing to allow a 16-year-old to. Well, very sensible.
Same A-levels.
There you go. But it was like a coming of.
Talk about blinkers. Talk about narrowing your field.
But you went deeper at age 16, 17, 18 than probably most US undergrads would go until their final. So I was,
especially at schools like ours, where some of the teachers would have happily slipped into undergraduate teaching.
Happily, and they would. I had little tutorials with the history teacher, for example. Absolutely right. And at one stage, I was doing the French Revolution in history. I was doing Burke versus Paine in politics, and I was doing Tale of Two Cities in English.
Gosh.
So I looked like an absolute god because I was walking into the history lesson going, well, of course, Dickens, believe. And everyone thought, this kid's absolutely on fire. But I mean, that was great. But it was also a product of the fact I'm scientifically and numerically enumerate and my language is terrible. So there's, swings and roundabouts.
Trade-offs. You don't sound like you were a bullshitter, though. You sound like you might have carried something from one of those classes into the other class, but you carried it carefully.
I loved it.
Yes.
I mean, I went from being an unhappy, geeky, I went from a sort of unconfident teenager that didn't really get teenage boys and was struggling with my own body. I was very tall, but sort of went through puberty quite late, all this kind of stuff. Suddenly at 16, everything happened at once. I sort of grew comfortable in my own skin. And then suddenly I was just every day, all I was doing was stuff I was absolutely fascinated by. And again, to my discredit in some ways, but physics and languages and all these other things disappeared. And I was just in the 18th century all day, every day at school. It became very easy.
So it's quite idyllic, isn't it? Because this part of West London in which you were living and being educated is particularly beautiful, especially if you have a relationship with the river, which you did. And then you've found that groove that some people never find, which is the stuff, whether it's going to turn into a career in the future or not at this point, is immaterial. You're just actually enjoying education.
You're so right.
Very lucky.
Did
you know you were lucky? Because
yes,
there must have been other lads there who were kind of like me, who were just dragging themselves to class every day and resenting every bloody minute of it.
No, I absolutely knew I was lucky.
Wow.
And because I hadn't felt lucky 2 years before.
It's interesting.
So I suddenly felt, well, I think I do feel lucky now. And you're right, and it was idyllic. And we lived in this strange village, which was also in London. But I mean, I never went up to London. Me and my mates, we'd when we did sneak to the pub, we'd go to Richmond by the river, or we'd go to Mortlake. It was a sort of provincial life,
yes,
but one within, albeit sort of within Greater London. And then we'd row on the river. And then that sort of kept me away from the slightly more destructive things that some of my teenager friends were getting up to, which, again, I'm incredibly grateful. I want to go back to that young man and sort of say, well, you had more willpower than I.
That's true, to resist some of those temptations.
Yeah, than I think I've got now. I mean,
yes,
it's incredibly impressive in some ways. And I was really enjoying what I was doing. And then life, I just remember life suddenly, which had been a little bit daunting, suddenly this just excitement and full of possibility and this idea of these endless years stretching off with no sense of aging or anything, but just it would all be a great adventure.
And how quickly did your rowing prowess emerge? Because everyone gets stuck in a boat at a school like that at some point, and then a relatively small proportion stay in it.
Well, yeah, I think it's just because I was terrible at everything else. I was bad at.
Were you? Were
sports.
you not good at rugby?
I was good at rugby, but
Okay.
I was in terms of summer sports. I couldn't play cricket or anything.
Okay.
I was very slow, and so I just found that it was. And you know what? It's that funny thing, and I've got it with my daughter at the moment. It's a great blessing. Sometimes a kid just finds himself in a nice school of fish. And
Yes.
nothing to do with me. I had 4 or 5 really good people that we all happened to go to the same school at the same time, and we did well. We like won things, and so that really fires your enthusiasm, and it's like it's when that lovely alchemy in sport when you discover that your Arsenal class of whatever it was now, the whatever they're called, the Immortals or whatever,
Yes.
or you're the Roy Keane era at Man United. You just go, oh God, this is fun. This is there's some weird energy here, and I don't know why. And it's very much great in the whole of some of its parts. And I see that in my daughter as well at the moment. I say, you're so lucky because this is very unusual. But she's just got this group of girls around her, and they're just sparking off each other, and that's why I had. That's really and I enjoyed. Do you know what that taught? We enjoyed success, and then that gave me this sense, which multiple failures since then is not entirely broken, which is there is a link between striving and achieving. It was great. We tried really hard, and then we won a silver medal at the national championships, whatever it was. And so I really got this sense of kind of hard work and oh look, it will lead to something. And as I say, despite the vicissitudes of life subsequently, I think that sort of optimism, that basic, fundamental, maybe quite naive belief that there will be a positive outcome to doing good things and digging in, I think has always stayed with me.
I have a habit of asking people when they realise they were intelligent. I used to have a habit of asking people when they realised they were intelligent, and I've stopped doing it because it gets clipped out of context and makes us both look ridiculous on social media, as if we're sitting there smelling our own farts, going, "Oh, when did you first realise you were intelligent?" So, but I think if I did still answer that question, you would probably tell me that you still don't.
I don't at all.
But that's
I think
silly.
I think I'm good at. No, I think I'm good at summarizing information that's presented to me. I'm good at presenting.
Yes.
I sometimes think.
But you're a talented historian, surely.
Well, I mean, I don't.
What did Keith Perry see in you then?
Yeah, no. I think. Look, I think I'm good at reading lots of sources and evaluating them, and then bashing them into sentences that hopefully can explain reasonably complicated ideas. But I often think that part of my secret skills. My mum's Canadian, so I'm half North American, and in North America, I am just a normal. As you know, they're better at communicating over there, right? I go to a wedding in North America. The speeches are like drop dead brilliant, all of them. And I kind of stagger on to do my cousin's best man speech. It's like no one notices. Everyone's like, yeah, man, decent. Okay. In England, I give a speech, and everyone's like, oh, that was fabulous, because we communicate differently. In TV, we always know if you want to interview an American expert, you're going to get some great content.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
I didn't know that.
If you ask a British historian, they'll go, well, of course, Churchill at this point was. He was. There were multiple, things he was trying to. An American will be like, Dan, Churchill faced a decision. It's just a culture.
Why do we think that is?
I don't know. I have talked. I mean, I've talked to people about this. In Italy, for example, there's still a very strong oral component in education. So there's a lot of presenting to the class.
Okay.
I think in North America, there's still like debate club is still is a big thing. I think maybe that we, but I think there's just And here, the people that don't like me, of which there are many, think it's sort of, if when I listen to their criticisms, it's often the things that people say about North Americans. It's like sort of brash and loud and over enthusiastic, fake, and and I think that is I sound, it's so weird for me because I sound and look like a sort of great Brit like my dad, classics. But actually in my heart and growing up, and I am my mother's son in many ways, in sort of mentally and personality-wise. And I think I'm the people that influence me in terms of my sort of interpersonal skills are my Canadian sort of uncles. These sort of charismatic, sort of North American. Hey man, that was awesome. Which is some Brits. It's Marmite. Some Brits just despise that. Ugh, have a nice day. It was awesome. And that's very much my sort of. And I think that's my background. But
and you were also sort of absorbing the craft from a very early age. You've said a few times that you would be doing pieces to camera on family holidays because your dad knew how to edit and shoot, so you and your sisters would be reporting live from the Champs- Élysées or the Pyramids.
Again, what turned out to be extraordinary privilege, but at the time everyone thought was just eccentric weirdness. And my dad, and probably still is, but my dad had the old JVC, and he bought, very proud of that. He came back from whatever it's called, that Radio Shack, and with the camera, and little did we know that every Tom, Dick and Harry in 2024
would be filming everything.
Would be filming themselves, sort of opining on the England football manager. So yes, I mean, actually, one of the greatest gifts, weirdly, that he did give, he said, "Go on, Dan." In fact, he used to love making these sort of videos of family holidays, and my sisters and I he'd go, well, he was filming, so he'd go, there's no point filming endless boring shots that other people did, because he understood, the craft. So he'd be like, get in front of the camera and say what's happening. So little Kate, my sister, would be like, yeah, we're standing in Spain and we've had a lovely dinner. And what did you have for dinner? That's because he rightly knew what we now all know, which is that content is more interesting than here's some sort of shots of a cathedral shot badly, sort of with the rain calling down. So it turns out that was I did have again one of the many head starts there. That was certainly one.
There's a sense of planets aligning now as you head towards the end of the sixth form with all of the background experiences that we've established. I mentioned Keith Perry because I like in this series of podcasts to credit teachers who've had big influences on people, and I think that describes him, doesn't it?
It certainly does describe him. He was an astonishing teacher. I mean, I was very lucky. And he taught me about the 18th century, and it's a century that I've ever since that, when I was 16, it's a century that I've written about now, and I love, and I'm fascinated by, and I'm ever more convinced it's the most important century in human history, and certainly one that I love studying and talking about. And so, yeah, without him, I don't think that would be the case. But it's funny. You mentioned sort of hitting stride. I really have this strange. Napoleon once said about generals, they used to go like, is he lucky?
Yes.
And everyone thought that's a very weird way to judge somebody. But I think it was true. And I hit a kind of run of luck, and it was luck. It just little things like exams just fell, the questions fell for me, and the Oxford admissions tutor just came down on the right side of thinking, is this kid a sort of overconfident bullshit public school boy, or is he actually, all these things that could have gone either way and almost did. They went for me, and actually that run of luck came to an end, as they do. But for a few years, I was on this extraordinary. It felt like I was just on this conveyor belt, and things just kept working out, and it was great. And if you're ever going to have luck in your life, that's a pretty good time to have it.
Because it's the launch, isn't it? The bigger the launch, the further you go.
Well,
and yet you carried a consciousness of it being temporary.
Yeah.
So. I mean, that would have been disastrous, wouldn't it? If you'd thought so. Oddly enough, when I finish talking to you, I'm interviewing Rupert Everett this afternoon. I don't know whether this interview will go out the week before or the week after. And his 20s were similarly gilded, and he made the mistake of thinking it was going to last forever. Well,
yes, that's the big mistake. And I wonder whether having family in in the industry, perhaps, or reading a lot. Yes. I mean, being a historian, looking at the nature of. I mean, when you study people in the past, you can't believe when you're reading about Napoleon. Say, I mentioned him before.
Yeah,
he goes from all conquering, just bestriding this narrow earth like a colossus, to shivering in the wastes of Russia within the space of months, if not a couple of years. We see that time and again. People thrust to the greatest heights and then just absolutely dash down something. And I think when you read about that constantly, you're surrounding yourself with that. As the person at the Roman emperor's ear whispered during the triumphs, you're still mortal, and all this will come to an end. And also, I never, being a minor BBC Two history presenter, I never reached the point.
I didn't mean just that. I meant the luck, the concept of serendipity.
No, but I also never had too much problem keep my feet on the ground.
Memento mori.
I am, yeah, exactly. Wowee.
So if I'd met you in your upper sixes, you are against your dad's wishes, and I like this line, and I know what it means. Your dad didn't want you to go to the same college that he'd been to because he didn't want to be a family that said, well, I was there and so my son will go there as well. But you went there anyway. It was particularly good for history at that time.
Yes,
Still is,
it was one of the few colleges in Oxford Balliol which has it has sort of professorships of history, and it has more than most. So it was one. Yeah.
So if I'd met you that summer, before you went up to Oxford, and said, what are you going to do when you graduate? What do you want to be when you grow up? What would you have said?
Well, I thought I knew pretty well, actually. What I wanted to do was go and work at the UN or another sort of transnational body, because as you remember from the 90s, when the world made sense and history had come to an end, there were problems, of course, but those problems felt solvable. Like, if we can just we'll get Clinton to get Arafat to sign up to that deal, then that will sort Israel-Palestine. We got okay, all right. That interestingly now, let's really focus our efforts on maybe Somalia or these places, but they felt like distinct, intractable, but problems that could be solved by the global community working together. Not the world in which we now find ourselves, which is a world where people talk, and I have some sympathy. It feels like general sort of dissolution, and there's backsliding. There's huge problems. There's climate, of course, but there's problems around governance and democracy and all sorts of things. Tech. And that world, I think, it will remain, I don't want to answer for you, but I think intensely surprising to us, because when we were 20, when we were 19, everything we absorbed at that formative point was that actually liberal democracy was the answer. Russia was having elections. China was sort of edging towards a trading relationship and opening up a rapprochement with the West. Vietnam was trading the West. It was like this. I think we might have solved this one. I think we're going to get there. We'll stick Al Gore in the White House in 2000, and jobs are good, right?
Yeah.
And boom. And I wanted to be part of that adventure. I wanted to go and work for these sort of these supranational organizations. I thought it'd be exciting. I thought to go and do refugee work. You could sort of do hands-on stuff. You're building things, but you're also doing conflict resolution. And I thought it would be, look, if I'm being really honest with myself, looking back, I'm probably a child that was sort of steeped in stories of the British Empire, and these supranational organisations, just as it's been, the Red Cross has been for the Swiss, are a way for sort of ambitious young people from those traditionally kind of imperial nations to go out and experience a little bit of what that was like. We all know about Rory off in Iraq doing that kind of thing, and I think people our age probably were hoping to scratch some of those itches and see the world and play a part and try and do good in the world through those organisations rather than the India office or the British Army, but then everything changed.
And I guess take away from your years at Oxford, we've got 3 boat races and a double first. It's not bad. Well, it suggests that you managed to balance your leisure time and your academics.
I always say this to people studying. When I go into do schools, I say, do history at university. I'll tell you why. It's very easy. You get to control your own diary. You don't have to go to labs. So history is great. Now, history is the perfect subject of rowing, because you get up in the morning, you go rowing, and then you got most of the day and you go to the library. There's not sort of intensive lectures and things. They just let you get on with yourself and you catch up on the weekend. So I never had a problem balancing work and rowing. And in fact, it kept me honest, because you can't go out too late at night and get a hangover. And so you'd get up in the morning. By 8:30 in the morning, you'd done your training session, so you thought, well, might as well pop over to the library. So you're in good fettle. So I think it helped. It helped.
What's the joy in rowing? What's the sort of magic of it?
It's a very good question. I think about that a lot. I mean,
Do you?
No, yeah, because actually rowing's a very odd sport. There are friends of mine who went to the Olympics who had a wall chart and just crossed off every day to the Olympics. Like, there's no joy there. No. Stevie Gerrard would turn up early for training, right? Anfield. He's just like, I cannot wait to get in there. And then you might not win any massive silverware, but you're going to remember the comeback that you beat, so-and-so 3-2. Yeah. And there's going to be highlights of your career. Rowing's just unrelentingly grim. I think in some countries, that was a sliding doors moment. I almost went off to San Francisco to row at Berkeley, California, and
on a scholarship.
Yeah,
and that would have led down the Olympics route and the whole.
Well, I don't know if it led down the Olympics route. I think it would have led being in the Bay Area,
of course,
in 2001. So can you imagine?
Gosh,
right?
yes.
So I think my life would have been fundamentally different, But I think there, where you're sort of gliding across glassy waters and there's a low mist hanging on it, and it's good. When you're rowing on the Thames or on a river in the middle of England somewhere, and it's half time it's flooded, it is just actually, objectively quite miserable. I don't really know. I don't know, but you get sort of addicted, and also, but I was addicted to the team, the spirit. It's fun to do. It's fun to be doing things, and it's fun to be good at something. I say this to my kids as well. It was a real treat to be really good at something. And it's something when I look at my friends, and it's nice. It doesn't, and also, of course, it does not matter what that is. It couldn't be absolutely anything, but it's nice to know that you're good. You're just really good at something, and that was great to be part of that rowing team. and we were one of the best in the country. That was it, and it was great. But I do often wish that I'd chosen a more enjoyable sport where the training is enjoyable.
And would you by the time or shortly before getting your double first, would you have admitted to yourself or acknowledged that you were also good at history?
Yeah, I think I was good at history. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. But whenever I do an IQ test, I'm really terrible. I can never do all those little dots and squares.
Anyway.
And there you go. I feel I might be. This might be fertile ground. You might agree with this, but so I think look, everything comes in different forms, doesn't it? But I was pretty good at history, I think.
So then, as we've already established, you do basically you invent TikTok by doing these little films while you were rowing for Oxford, and just sort of with some of your crewmates and rivals, and someone at the BBC spots it, and your dad is initially reluctant, but you talk him into doing it. And so it's another sliding door moment. Were you just being a bit sort of a kid in a sweet shop? Oh, that sounds fun. I'll do that. This wasn't. Obviously, it wasn't meeting an ambition that you'd already developed and nurtured.
Head was turned. My head just got.
Well, it would be though.
I thought it was super glamorous.
Well, it was, relatively speaking.
Yeah, it certainly was compared to
Rowing.
launching into either more rowing, which is certainly not glamorous, or going to Berkeley, maybe slightly more glamorous. But postgraduate study in order to become a historian. And
was that the plan?
Yeah, I think that by that stage that was the plan. Yeah,
so you realised you had the academic nous, and you had the enthusiasm, you had the passion, and that's the only path open for you if you want to carry on doing history for all of your life. I think you become a historian.
Yes, that's right. And I was looking at doing some PhD, some Napoleonic history, and then this BBC thing came along, and I got my head turned, and I thought it was great. And then, do you know what's interesting? I went to all of my sort of supervisors and the academics I respected, and not a single one of them, they just like, go and do it.
They're all dreaming of it, aren't they?
Go and do it. It was really weird.
And was it literally, without that, you'd have been on the plane to California? Is it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think that was
put a fork in your road.
It put a big fork in my road. Yeah, weird moment. Yeah, and then we went to Egypt for this anniversary of the Battle of Alamein, and I just could not believe my luck. We drove around the deserts of Egypt through World War II minefields, guided by Bedouin, going to places where these events had happened that I'd read about, never dreamed that I'd actually get to see. We went to interview veterans of that battle all across Britain, often in legionary clubs or legion clubs, or sitting in small council flats, or sitting in bigger houses, depending on how life had treated them since, and asked them about the battles that they've been involved in. And the wonderful thing about the media that people tend, from the outside, it looks like it's all about travel and sort of somehow just being on telly, being cool. Actually, it's the people we work with. The wonderful. I met this sort of cosmopolitan gang of people that were interested in history, but also kind of cool because they had to make that history accessible, and they had to kind of bolt it together. They were storytellers, they were artists in a way, and camera operators who had stories that coming out of them about everything they'd done over the years and how they were with Michael Palin in the Zambezi. And I thought, this world, this is just the best. And we had a beer every night looking out over the Mediterranean, and I was being paid 300 quid or something. I couldn't believe my eyes.
And you're also, not also, as you've just established, you're meeting people in a way that you don't meet when you're essentially buried in books.
Yeah, that was the...
You're not going to meet anyone who was in the Napoleonic Wars, but in the context of the places that you're visiting, you're meeting people who were there in the moments of history. You're meeting
the protagonists. You're going to places and having experiences with Egyptians. I still remember, this is that sad thing. Now these trips seem to cut less deep, but at that time I could tell you still the names of the Egyptian members of that team and their life journeys, and what they told me about being a Christian Egyptian, and it was still under Hosni Mubarak at the time, and life. I just was soaking it up like a sponge. I couldn't both. And the weird thing is, I am very lucky because a lot of people that and I know who they develop a shtick in their 20s, which is I love rocks, or I love cars, or I love food. And in their 50s, they're like, actually, what I really want to do is wellness or yoga or anything, tech.
Yes.
But everyone's like, yeah, sorry, mate, I think you're the guy that does, trees. And my extraordinary good luck is that when I go out on location now, in Pompeii last week, for example, it's every time I get up in the morning and walk into Pompeii before it opens, it's like the first time. I'm very, very lucky.
Yes.
I love it. And it doesn't have just to be glamorous Pompeii. It could be the folk museum in Basingstoke.
I mean, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? Because if you didn't have that authenticity can't be faked. You can try to.
You can try to.
But if you've lost your passion,
yeah,
eventually it comes out of your eyes.
I think so. And I think that way madness lies. And I think for your own mental health and wellness to know that you've got to keep going out every day and doing something you don't quite believe in anymore must be brutal.
You're on a roll now. You're not looking back. You know this is what you want to do. The books follow. The more collaborations with your dad. You do some stuff on your own. This, in a way, is the period of your career that people will be quite familiar with. So I'm going to fast forward to 2015, not least because I want to talk about the new book as well, when you launch History Hit. How much of that was a reaction to changes in the industry and the things we talked about when we first sat down, and you realising that you'd been on the last days of the golden age and you wanted to be in the box seat for whatever the new age was?
I think that was important. I knew that. I mean, I was young. I was just young enough.
Yes.
To know that when BBC Two, we had a show that went out on Battle of Hastings. It went out against the opening ceremony of the Athens Olympics on BBC One, and I remember that I walked past the Evening Standard the following the following evening it would have been, and there was the one they used to have the headlines. Remember in the sort of in the paper under the headlines, major out or something, and that said biggest TV audience in history for opening ceremony. And I went, how about the guy on BBC Two, right? And from that moment on, I was in my early 20s. I thought this is, and my friends were looking at stuff on the internet.
Yeah.
These things were happening in my generation. And from that moment, I was like, this doesn't make sense. I put 6 months of my life into that show, and it just got annihilated. And this is no way to conduct yourself. And so I did know that. At the same time, the BBC used to throw me kind of 6 shows a year, kept me so busy, and then that was coming to an end for loads of reasons. One is there wasn't that volume of shows, but I think there's fashions, times changed, taste changed. I think, well, Dan Snow, let's see if that other, you can have one show a year maybe, and I realised that I was in my 30s. By that stage you're a bit of a dad, and you've got responsibilities, and you go, I'm not sure I'm going to run around after these commissioning editors and sort of beg for scraps on the table. I think I can, and by that stage there were people out there on YouTube and elsewhere that had taken their life in their own hands and were becoming some of the biggest names in entertainment and everything else. So I thought, I've got to do this. I've got to jump. And it was and it's quite embarrassing and weird when you go back to Dover Castle, and the time you've been there previously, you've been there with the BBC. Hi, yes. I'm here with BBC One, with a crew of 20 people. And the next time you go, you're with sort of one work experience person carrying a sort of, a phone.
Yeah. And
you start sort of yelling into the phone, and 3 people are watching the live stream. But it was the best thing I ever did.
When did you know it was working?
It was incredible. Yeah, I think. Well, I tell you what. Probably when you get your first check for a podcast, because we're so used to doing endless stuff on digital, endless,
sure, yeah.
And you can go, oh, it's really cool. Yeah, a famous person retweeted me. Like, yeah, that's a vanity metric, bud. It's not putting any food on the table. And there was this one day when Acast, who's the sort of publishing marketing people for podcasts, they sent me a check for £100, and I was like, so hang on, that's chat via the internet, going to people's ears that somebody has actually paid me some money for. And I thought, hang on, that's exciting.
You're way ahead of the curve here, weren't you?
I don't know. There were podcasts at the time, but I was a little bit ahead.
There's podcasts. Everyone's got a podcast now. It wasn't the case then. Yeah. And a quick word about Andy Taylor then, in whose memory we both work with the foundation, because he was relatively intrinsic in this process, I think.
He was anyone who knows him. He's a sort of legend in the industry, and great friend of yours, and great friend of everyone who met him. Just one of those extraordinary characters. And he saw the potential in YouTube, for example, years before other people, and he effectively left his job to create this very strange business that tried to put really high-end factual content on YouTube rather than just cat videos and people falling off ladders. And everyone thought he was mad. And he created this, really a unicorn, a very, very successful British startup business, which people may not have heard of. It's called Little Dot Studios, and it's named after his brilliant mum. And it is responsible for an astonishing proportion of global YouTube traffic every day. This is an enormous British success story. And he, when I was sort of flailing around struggling, he saw what I was doing and bought my company, which was a blessing for me because I'm terrible at payroll and businessy things, and so I could become a creative director of history, and him and his team would run it, add it to their company and run it. So I got the best of both worlds. I was a strange entrepreneur. I was a strange founder, because I founded it because I wanted to work in it. I didn't found it because I wanted to make an exit, make lots of money. So it worked really well.
Yeah, and not just you, of course. You also wanted to provide a platform for other brilliant historians to provide the content that you would also, as a punter, want to watch.
Yes, the dream. I was also aware of the march of time, and I thought, as I thought, as I get old, no one cares about me anymore. How wonderful to have a kind of to build this great stable of historians, of people who can build their own audiences and stuff, to have this network effect. So yeah, we've that's great. So I sort of started it, but clearly, if it was only ever going to be a vehicle for Dan Snow, it would not have worked. I mean, there's not a sufficient number of people out there who are interested in me. So it was great. We got ancient historians, we've got social historians now, we've got medieval historians, we've got American historians. So it's been a wonderful project. And now actually I do less and less, because clearly we've discovered all these people that are better than I am at doing things, and we their shows do much better than mine on YouTube and on the SVOD, the subscription platform, and on the podcast. So it's great. It's really nice. It's a happy thing to see your slice of it diminish.
And none of it is ever going to be eclipsed by an Olympic opening ceremony, because that nature of linear television that's what I mean by being a bit ahead of the curve, not just on the podcast, but also on realising that people are going to have it in their pocket. They're going to be able to watch it when they want, listen to it when they want, and it's huge. I mean, it has been an enormous success, and of course brought people like Susanna Lipscomb and Lucy Worsley and Mary Beard into orbits that they wouldn't have got into if they'd been relying on linear television to do their stuff with their books and with their podcast. So how do you pick a new project? Because the new book, The History of England, which is in conjunction with your History Hit team, this is another kind of aligning of all your planets, isn't it?
Yeah, so one of the great things about history is that it's evergreen, as we say. So you make a program about D-Day, and then you suddenly realise, hang on, that is as interesting tomorrow as it is yesterday. And so you make although my great passion, I absolutely love, and you've seen when I'm being naughty on Twitter, I do love jumping into kind of contemporary political moments and providing a bit of context, a bit of history. But on the whole, if you make a program about Anne Boleyn, oh my gosh, Anne Boleyn. Do you know when we have to leave Anne Boleyn podcasts and TV shows off our top charts because she skews the figures so badly.
Everyone is obsessed with Anne Boleyn.
So we go, hey, what are our top 10 performing Instagram reels? But obviously
Apart
not
from
including Anne Boleyn.
Really?
It's completely bonkers. I probably shouldn't tell everyone that. That's extremely sensitive,
of course,
market-changing information. But so all of that, we can use it constantly. So we're always, so when someone does a podcast or makes a show for our TV channel about Anne Boleyn, that's as usable.
Of course it is.
In years to come, and on our anniversary, our birthday, so it continues to interest people forever. But this is what's great is that, in the old days, you're in a wonderful position of having this in your day job. But in the old days, people come to me and say, I found a Spitfire in my garden. And I'd say, right, I've got to go to the BBC and I've got to persuade. You think that I'm this kind of all-conquering history television presenter. In fact, I'm just a complete muppet who just gets scraps from the commissioner's table. But anyway, so I'd have to go to that commissioner, get an elevator up to the 5th floor, sort of walk in, they'd look at me, oh God, it's that history person trying to get us to do sort of more weird dad history. And I'd go and I'd say, look, it's really exciting. There's a Spitfire in a garden. They'd be like, yeah. And of course, sometimes they say, yes, great.
Yes.
But most of the time, of course, they say, no, we don't want to just let you make 100. So what's great now is people come to me all the time and say, we're going to look for Shackleton's Wreck Endurance. Yeah. There's a Spitfire in my garden. We just found a lovely manuscript in a castle in Scotland. I go, I'll be there on Monday. I've got my team in-house. We've got 35 people working in a cool office in Shoreditch. We've got camera operators. We've got audio recording people. And we just whip up there and we do it. And so what's really nice is that stuff that doesn't quite meet the threshold of a Netflix or of a BBC, although we do some stuff that does. But we, on the whole, we can play in that pool. That's fine. Because there's enough people around the world who find the fact that we discovered Thomas Cromwell's Bible that he used when he was hanging out with Anne Boleyn. Yeah. That's of great interest. That's one of our best, Susanna Lipscomb, one of our best performing bits at our programmes. And actually that probably wouldn't have got on BBC Two 10 years ago, but it's on there now and it works really well for us. And so we're able just to go, yes, bring us your history. We'll take it all. And that's why I guess the book, because We travel around the country, visiting museums, visiting English
You're
heritage
so
sites.
mobile. That's one of
We're
the
so
things that comes across.
Yeah.
And it is the big difference, the big change in what went before.
So responsive. We move super fast.
Do you know what you've just described?
What?
You've just described being a journalist reporting on the past.
Yes, weirdly, I think that's true. It's like, in times past, there are some, so for example, the BBC, there's a sort of science journalist, climate journalist, those who have those sort of factual silos, and they're given quite a lot of lead, and it's like go and bring back interesting, slightly longer form packages. And I think I have slightly, in some ways it's modern, but in some ways it's a bit old fashioned. I've sort of slightly reinvented that news magazine features and pieces. Yeah, so that is true. But yeah, you're right. It is the journalistic side. It's fun. It's like, yep, we'll be there. And you know what? We'll have a little snoop around and see if there's more to this story than meets the eye.
Which there often is.
Yeah.
So what is within the covers of the story of England, Making of a Nation? Because I mean, with a title like that, you might expect it to be 40,000 pages long.
Yeah, well, indeed. We talk about the story of this mad country, and what I find really interesting about England is there's no obvious beginning. I'm so struck by countries where there's, De Gaulle announces the start of the Republic, or Washington and the boys in Pennsylvania all go, right, this is day one, lads.
I declare.
Yeah, that is it. And we can't even agree on who the first king of England was, and English people, England sort of technically came to an end in 1707, but if you talk to most people out there, they'd be absolutely astonished to find out that there's no king and queen. The king's still regularly referred to as the King of England. And there's a Church of England, so it's very interesting. Sometimes England's been bigger than the place that is now England. Sometimes it's been smaller. So it's a very interesting story to kind of explore in those ways. Since I've been in the publicity for this book, the first question, this will be you're right in your wheelhouse. The first question now is about identity, English identity. What's that mean? And values. And these are people that are going to book festivals. It's good faith. These are not online angry people. These are genuinely interested and interesting people, but who are obviously looking at the world around them and seeing and trying to go back to books like this to talk about, to try and find out what Englishness is in a world that's changing so dramatically.
In good faith, not in good pursuing bad faith or something like
good
that.
faith. And being worried when they hear stories of migrants landing on beaches and assault and invasions and mosques being built in their village, which tend not to be being built, but those are. And I think those are, people are allowed to explore that and be nervous, and part of that is human. As we get older, we all sort of shake our heads and
the more history you have, the less spooked you are by change. Surely,
I think so. And the deeper your understanding of history, the more spooked you are by change, because you understand that change is absolutely inevitable. Change is the constant. Changes every time. Every time I go and make a difference, because I'm a generalist. It was so fun. I do ancient Egypt, and every time you go and talk to the experts, go, well, Dan, we need to understand about this period. It's some profound transformation. And you go, is it? Oh, you really surprised me, mate. Okay, great. 14th century, climate's changing, diseases, technology, engineering, demographics, everything's changing, right? So it's like, you don't say. And I think that we are also, of course, in a period of absolutely astonishing change, and that change is super disquieting for people. I was remembering today. I was listening to Shackleton, the way they spoke, and then it made me think about because there's recordings of some of Shackleton's men and Shackleton himself, very brief recording. And I was thinking about David Starkey, who said, people nowadays speak in language I hardly understand anymore. And you think, well, actually, that is a constant.
Everyone that age could have said that at some point about every other age.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear those sort of clipped voices, and that's recent.
Yes,
I mean,
it is.
Let alone, I mean, how do you think people in Dorset talked 200 years ago, 500 years ago? I mean, so we are, of course, living through dramatic change, and also the interesting thing about this book, it's been like you realise accidentally you've just hurled a kind of petrol can into the culture war, because by writings of history of England, people say, right, well, having written it, are we living through an era of unparalleled immigration? You're like, wow, I didn't know that's fascinating. And of course the answer is, In some ways, there were extraordinary ways of immigration that historians are still arguing about in the beginning of the Iron Age and at various points in the Stone Age. The people that built Stonehenge did not look like us. At the same time, and then we disagree. We argue about the level of migration around Viking invasion, Roman invasion, Anglo-Saxon, the Germanic, Saxon, Jutish invasions. So that is it's difficult to talk about. But you go, well, okay, let's assume that you're right, that now we have a record number of people living in the country that weren't born here. We've got a record number of people travelling to work at 60 miles an hour. The rule book's been torn up and thrown out. By every measure, we've got record numbers of people living beyond the age of 60. We've never been so old. We've got record few numbers of children. There used to be kids choking up the streets with their hijinks and their games and playing shove halfpenny or whatever. Everything, by every measure.
There's just more.
Yeah. It's like we got record numbers of people flying.
Ian Douglas-Smith said to me once, because there are more people in work than ever before, and I said there are more people alive than ever before. Surely that's not the correct metric. We're looking at proportions and percentages. Yeah. And it is well, as with everything you do, it's a lovely mixture of scholarship and accessibility, communicability. Do you as we near the end of this conversation? Well, we are at the end of this conversation, and we haven't used the word ambition. You fell happily into this world. You've loved it. You value success, clearly. You pay attention to ratings and to performance and to figures. But in terms of boxes that you haven't ticked yet, whether it is a career milestone or an achievement, or whether it is simply a project or an area that you feel you haven't explored yet, what's on your to-do list? What might you, if anything, or do you just carry on happily bouncing from one experience to the next?
I think that I have never set targets like that.
Clearly.
The only thing I've ever wanted to do was find a way to sustainably do what I love, and actually then, as you rightly point out, build a team that's big enough to sort of allow other people to sort of join in that journey as well. And that's been the greatest happiness of a big professional happiness of my life. I think that I've look, maybe you and I have both been lucky enough to interview enough people that have won a Nobel Prize or a sort of Pulitzer or something to realise that actually that stuff is not super important. We all, of course, our vanity of us, some of us would we'd inevitably we'd be thrilled to win something like that, but that's not anything to pin a career on. The key thing is to keep on keeping on. And I realise I'm old enough now to realize I have gone through periods where my mental wellness has not been what it is, when I've been anxious, when I've been low, partly caused by having kids. Like all of us, when you have kids, you're sleep deprived, you're getting out there. I was working at the BBC House thinking, where is this? Am I still enjoying this much as I once? So what I now know that the highest thing I could ever hope for is to continue, as you say, having these experiences, continue to have a vehicle by which it allows me to go to Pompeii, go to the Antarctic to look at Shackleton, to engage with amazing people, talk to wonderful historians about their books. I got to interview Rachel Maddow yesterday about her book. Anne Applebaum comes on to talk about dictatorships. It's hugely privileged for me. So I feel very lucky doing that. And I also realise that professional part of my life isn't, and perhaps a diminishingly important part of my life, as your kids grow and develop their own lives and your family life. My wife does extraordinarily important work that I'm increasingly a part of and help in supporting her. And so I don't think I do have any kind of totemic things. I'm like, I'm gonna land that Netflix series, because I think when you reach that peak, you realise that the walking up was the interesting bit.
The nice thing about starting early is that I hope I'll be able to build this momentum behind the career and then build a marriage and family later on. Because I come from a wonderful family and I really aspire to give my kids all the advantages that I had and all the love I had as a boy. You've pulled it off.
I hope so. I think so, actually. Thank you.
The Story of England, Making of a Nation by Dan Snow and the History Hit team is out now. Dan Snow, thank you.
Oh, thank you.